Bapak dan Ibu hadirin yang kami hormati, ladies and gentlemen, our next agenda, Ministerial Fireside Chat, Financing Transition in ASEAN is about to begin. So we would like to invite everyone here, all participants to enter the room and have a seat please. Because we're going to welcome the Ministers of Finance of the Republic of Indonesia, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Finance of Singapore, and Minister of Finance of Thailand, who are about to enter the room. Kepada seluruh peserta, kami silakan untuk dapat memasuki area seminar pada pagi hari ini, karena sesaat lagi rangkaian acara akan segera kita mulai. Bapak dan Ibu, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to invite each of every one of you to enter the seminar room, because our seminar is about to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to welcome Her Excellency Minister of Finance of the Republic of Indonesia, Ibu Sri Mulyani Indrawati,
and His Excellency Mr. Lawrence Wong, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Finance of Singapore.
and also His Excellency Mr. Akom Tampitaya Paisit, Minister of Finance of Thailand. The Bali Nusa Dua Convention Center on Ministerial Fireside Chat, Financing Transition in ASEAN. Bapak dan Ibu, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to invite all of you to have seated please because our event is about to begin.
Om Swastiastu. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom, Namo Buddhaya, Salam Kebajikan. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Her Excellency Minister of Finance of the Republic of Indonesia, Ibu Sri Mulyani Indrawati,
His Excellency Mr. Lawrence Wong, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Finance of Singapore,
His Excellency Mr. Akom Tampitaya Paisit, Minister of Finance of Thailand.
our prominent moderator, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen.
It's a pleasure for us to welcome all of you to Bali Nusa Dua Convention Center on Ministerial Fireside Chat, Financing Transition for ASEAN.
Ladies and gentlemen, let us introduce ourselves. My name is Regine and my partner Faizur. It is an honor for us to be a master of ceremony for today's seminar.
Ladies and gentlemen, our agenda today is Ministerial Fireside Chat about ASEAN Sustainable Finance Taxonomy version 2 as a key enabler for financing transition.
The session will provide avenue for AMS to share the current national development of sustainable finance agenda and the alignment with the achievement of ATSF version 2. Before we start the session, let us introduce our moderator, Mr. Eugene Wong from SFIA. He is the CEO of Sustainable Finance Institute Asia.
I would like also to invite our speakers for today's agenda, Minister of Finance of the Republic of Indonesia, Ibu Sri Mulyani Indrawati, and also Mr. Lawrence Wong, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Finance of Singapore,
His Excellency Mr. Akom Tampitaya Paisit, Minister of Finance of Thailand.
and we kindly invite our moderator and speakers to kindly come to the stage, please. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a round of applause for our moderator and speakers.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Eugene Wong.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, very good morning to you all of you. ASEAN is a very, very diverse region. We are slated to be the fourth largest economic bloc in 2030, but our GDPs per capita per annum range from $1,300 to $72,000. 10% of our citizens still don't have access to electricity. So it is obvious that while we all have our green ambitions, it's not so easy to turn green overnight because we don't want to cause social and economic dislocations. Therefore, transition has become very important for all of us. And indeed, transition is probably the key to the success of our sustainability journey. We are very fortunate to have with us today 3 thought leaders in transition from the region. And while they need no further introduction from me, I just want to start off the session by sharing with you some of the words of wisdom that have come from them recently or associated with them pertaining to transition. So if I can first start with our host, Ibu Sri Mulyani Indrawati, who's Finance Minister of Indonesia. Now, Ibu Sri Mulyani has made the very instructive observation, I quote, that the just and affordable principle is important in the energy transition. If we cannot prepare ourselves on the just and affordable principle in a real manner, there will not be any progress. His Excellency Lawrence Wong, who's Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance of Singapore, has highlighted the reality that the energy crisis and the climate crisis have become a vicious cycle. The world cannot afford to choose between an energy crisis and a climate crisis, and to have energy security, we'll need to resolve the climate crisis too. His Excellency Akom Tempitaya Paisit has said that it remains necessary for economies to make this transition based on their own circumstances and in the context of multilateral goals. And that you'll find later on is a very important statement. So, Your Excellencies, thank you very much for being with us again and spending time with us today to share your words of wisdom. And perhaps what I can do is start the session by inviting our ministers to share with us some opening thoughts about the topic of climate change and the importance of transition. And to start the ball rolling, I'd like to invite our host, Minister Sri Mulyani, to start off. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eugene. Very good morning to you all, and welcome to Bali. Welcome to this symposium or seminar. My dear colleague, Lawrence, and Minister Akom, also thank you for coming to this event. We are going to have the ASEAN Finance Minister meeting starting today and continue tomorrow, combine or join with Central Bank Governor. So talking about the climate change and especially related to the financing side, we recognize climate change and the report showing that the world is struggling to achieve avoiding 1.5 degrees centigrade increase on the temperature comparing to the pre-industrial level temperature. And even we are possibly can achieve, reach the 2 degrees centigrade. The consequence of the climate change, I think, well recognized. The ASEAN as well as Indonesia in this case, and as a archipelago countries, definitely is going to have a huge consequence if this going to continue. We also see the sea level increase, and most concerning for all of us is, of course, first that the climate change is going to hit hard mostly the poor, rather the one who actually have the ability to adapt or to mitigate the crisis. Now, for us to be able to avoid this disaster, each country has already put their nationally determined contribution, how they contribute to reduce the CO2. Indonesia, as the biggest country in ASEAN, we also commit to reduce the CO2 emission. We even enhance our national determined contribution commitment which recently announced. For example, we announced that previously 29% of the CO2 reduction, now it is enhanced by 31.89% if it is using our own effort and resources. If it is combined with the global effort and support, we increase from 41% reduction of CO2 into 43.2%. Now, if this is going to be committed, we translate it into what is then the action program, policy, as well as even project. And that's why we estimate that the need of financing is going to be around 281 billion. The biggest part of this financing is on the energy. And Indonesia, in this case, as the still growing economy, last year we grew by 5.3%, the demand for electricity and power will continue increase. So you cannot, in this case, saying that we are going to reduce the CO2 without growing the electricity or power sector in Indonesia. Combining between this, it is not only energy, of course. Indonesia has a huge forest, tropical forest. We also have a huge sea, which is they are all absorbing the CO2 with the mangrove. But I'm going to focus today on electricity or power sector because this is the most expensive from the financing point of view. And that's why for Indonesia, have a strategy to continue increasing the production of the power or energy in this case to satisfy the continuous growing demand without jeopardizing or worsening the CO2 emission is going to be very critical. And that's why we announced the energy transition mechanism. Within the ETM, first and foremost, how you are going to reduce the fossil fuel base, especially the coal, because 60% of our energy is actually based on coal. And this is not easy because this is just not switching off the power plant, but we also have the mining. We also need to compensate, and this is already have a long-term contract. So a lot of very detailed consequences and implications that need to be done, not to mention then the social economic impact wider of this reducing the CO2 through the power plant which is based on coal. On the other hand, the continued demand need to be continue also increase through the renewable energy. So for a big country like Indonesia, we need two things, two very important investment. Retiring coal, which is need money, and building the renewable, which is also need another investment fund. And that's why within the G20 presidency last year, Indonesia has already announcing this. The platform has been developed with the ADB support, and now we receive a lot of the international also support. We closely now working what we call it the country platform of the ETM, our special mission vehicle managing this, PTSMI, the CEO is here. And this is going to be how we are going to translate those commitments into action. Now we've already also announced 660 megawatt of retiring one power plant as a test case, so that we are going to be able how much it will cost, which costs that need to be compensated, who's going to financing, and especially during this time when the interest rate getting higher and pricier, that means who's going to contribute on the subsidizing this. And you are opening, in this case, my statement. That's why this energy transition and mechanism or any transition toward green economy should be just and affordable. Because you can switch off any power plant you like, but the question who's going to pay for that? First, they have a long-term contract, how you are going to compensate, what kind of compensation which is fair, and where is this money coming from? So that is going to be the area that now we are working very detailed on this energy transition mechanism. On the other hand, on the renewable energy, geothermal will require a different policy support. Hydro is going to be different race and support. Other, in this case, which is renewable energy will definitely also require a different support. And this will not isolate it from the price of the fossil fuel. If the fossil fuel getting very expensive, like what happened last August, last year, in which hit $120 per barrel, it definitely creates a lot of incentive to go to the renewable. But if the price now going down to 70 again, and we've actually also saw in the past, oil price can go down even further, then it will make this opportunity cost becoming even trickier. So these are all what I can see as a very tricky, dynamic situation, but the commitment toward this kind of renewable energy and reduction of the fossil fuel, especially coal-based, is there for us to go. I would like to stop by saying that in order for us to be able to do this more comprehensively, the government of Indonesia also passing a lot of legislation, including creating the carbon market. We also now introducing the carbon tax, so that we are going to use the market mechanism and non-market mechanism. We are also using our fiscal support, in this case tax holiday, tax allowance, the exception of the VAT or import duty for all related to this energy sector renewable and on this retirement of the coal. So these are all not just one standalone project, but we really put it within the context of the whole policy framework and how this is going to work with the market forces. And within that context, during the G20 of the announcement, 20 billion of just energy transition need to be translated into reality. Because if it is not, climate change will not go away with seminar to seminar, with announcement to announcement. It needs to be implemented. And that's why having the test case of 660 megawatt, this coal reduction is going to be one test case. We also have the PLN, that is electricity company owned asset, as well as the IPP that require a different handling. So these are all maybe the issue which I've tried to outline, but each issue we just not stop by saying that, oh, this is just an issue or a problem. We try to address this problem through all the mechanism in place, regulation, instrument, collaboration, as well as market and non-market mechanism. If I may, in this case, but I will save to the next session when next discussion related to the taxonomy. But the financing, especially from the market base, will definitely require the regulatory framework, especially on the capital and financial market. And that will require another issue that we need to discuss. But I will stop here first, because if it is not, I'm going to speak alone, and my two colleagues here, they have a lot of things to also to address. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I agree very much with your point that there's no point talking. We need action, and there's been a lot of talk, and now is the time for action. DPM Wong, can I invite you to follow on?
Thanks very much, Eugene. Good morning, selamat pagi, selamat Ramadan. Very good to be here. Let me start by thanking our host, Minister Sri Mulyani, for all the arrangements for us and for this very warm hospitality here in Bali. Climate change is obviously an existential threat for all of us, and we are taking it very seriously. We have to reduce our emissions in order to prevent global warming from happening. But this process of decarbonization is very expensive, and that's why we are talking about how we can facilitate a more just and affordable transition. How expensive will decarbonization be? There are some estimates. I think there was a McKinsey study that said the world will need about $9 trillion a year from now till 2050. $9 trillion a year to get to a greener economy. $9 trillion a year, and you add up over 30 years, means that you need about more than $200 trillion altogether. That's more than double the size of the global economy today. It took several hundred years for the world to build up a global economy of today's size. And we only have 30 years to build a new green economy that's twice the size of the economy we have now. So that's the scale of the challenge. It is a huge challenge. And Asia will, in fact, be the better front of this climate crisis, because Asia is where a lot of the transition needs to happen. Asia alone will require about 1/3 of the $9 trillion a year. About $3 trillion of green financing is needed in the Asia Pacific, and a lot in Southeast Asia. And that's why we do need to take this seriously and see how we can unlock more green financing in order to enable the just and affordable transition we all need to see happen in Asia, and in particular in Southeast Asia. How can we do this? How can we get more green financing here? There are some building blocks we can put in place. And just to mention quickly, 3 Ds. Ds. First, data. We need more data so that banks, financial institutions can see, can monitor what is actually happening. Second D is disclosure. We need proper disclosures and reporting so that there can be accountability, and the financial institutions that are providing the financing will be assured that there is no green washing. The third D is around definitions, and that's where taxonomies are so important, and that's why we are happy to be able to launch version 2 of the ASEAN taxonomy today, this time in this ASEAN Finance Ministers meeting. Definitions are important, particularly when it comes to transition projects. No one disputes what is a green project, no one disputes what is a brown project, but everything in between is a gray area, and there's a lot of question marks. What is a transition project? And that's where the taxonomies are very useful. And in the updated ASEAN taxonomy, we have looked at energy supply and the energy transition, which is very important for all the Southeast Asian countries. So with this taxonomy in place, we hope it will provide clarity to investors, to financial institutions, on what are the transition projects that are taking place in Southeast Asia that will allow us to move to a zero carbon pathway eventually. And this will hopefully unlock more transition projects, more renewable energy projects within Southeast Asian countries, also enable more cooperation of such renewable energy projects within ASEAN itself, potentially even as part of an ASEAN power grid in the future. So this is a good start for ASEAN. Eventually, we also have to look at how our taxonomy operates with other taxonomies around the world, because the EU has its own taxonomy, China has its own taxonomy, Australia, other countries will have their own, and we must ensure some form of interoperability so that when a global financial institution does some financing for a transition project, they can be assured of certain consistency across different jurisdictions. And again, Singapore will do our part in all of these financing activities. As a financial center, we feel a role and a responsibility to do everything we can to catalyze more private financing for transition projects all over Southeast Asia. And we will continue to work with all our partners to help accelerate green financing and enable Southeast Asia and ASEAN to move to a net zero future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, DP Wong. You have highlighted some very important points, which I will definitely take up further in the conversations that follow. But we already have 2 very important messages from our ministers. The first is that the time for talk is over. It's now time for action. And the second is that without money, it's not going to work. So we have to find that huge amount of money to get this going. Now, for our third message, I turn to Minister Akom.
Thank you, Eugene, and thank you very much for Excellency Sri Mulyani who hosting this very important event, particularly for the ASEAN country. When we're talking about the the financing transition, I just want to recall back to 5,000 years ago. In the earth that we live, at the time our ancestors lived with the nature. But now we left the nature behind because of economic development. So lots of things are happening that changed a lot from 5,000 years ago because of the climate change. Climate change is also one of the things that the human man-made happen in economic development, as well as the sustainable development issues. These two issues are very important and very related. So we left the nature behind because of the lots of pollution and the disaster. But now it's time that we need to bring back the nature to us. So many things that we're talking about, even the infrastructure and the economic activities that are all concerned about the CO2. We're talking only CO2, but we also have to talk about the other things. For example, the unseen particles in the air. What I just want to mention is the PM 2.5. Just envy Indonesia that successfully implement the measures, strict measures to protect the burning outside, particularly for the farmers that are causing the PM 2.5. That's only one source. But the other source is the also forest fire, as well as the in transport. In transport, we also seen the volatile organic compound. This is the, you cannot visibly see this particle. And the last thing is on the factory. So these things are all the man-made. The reason that I'm talking that the sustainable and climate change are related, because in order to tackle the climate change, I think we need the big effort from all sort of the stakeholders in the world, and particularly in this region. When we're talking about how to react, how is the policies, really depend on the individual countries, whether we are quick enough to tackle these issues. But collaboratively, particularly in the ASEAN, we need the common goals. We need the platform for all the countries in the ASEAN. I don't know what happened to my mic. Because we're talking about the cross-border infrastructure, people-to-people connectivity, but CO2 can fly in the air, cross the border. So this is why I'm saying that we need the common platform for all countries to collaborate. But how quick we react is really depend on the individual countries. In Thailand, we're talking about fighting the clean energy, just like the Excellency Simulayani mentioned. We rely on the oil and gas, and then we think that the coal is the clean energy, but it's no longer clean energy right now. So we have to look at for renewable energy. So Thailand react this issue 10 years ago. I think perhaps they're more than 10 years ago. So how we tackle the energy crisis, energy security. So looking at the renewable energy, we start from the solar. Solar is very expensive, so people cannot afford. And then gradually we're talking about how people participate in the renewable energy. We started to talk about the solar rooftop. So this is household size, so they can afford. But the investment in the capital is still very expensive at that time. but now the price is coming down. So it's more affordable for the people. The next issue is how the household share their electricity to the national grid, and how the household can bring back, how can they buy back the electricity when the sun is not shining. So this is the issues that we are discussing in Thailand. So anyway, the renewable energy from the household that we are also focusing on this issue. This is one way of our policy response. Secondly, on transport. Energy for transport, for motor vehicle. Now, we started from the bioenergy. So using agricultural products, particularly sugarcane and cassava, for the ethanol and the biodiesel to mix with the oil. So it can help raising the farmers' income, but also bringing the stability of the gasoline in the market. But now, I think for oil and gas, because of energy crisis, then we have to look at the new alternative. So the policy right now that we has already implemented, we looking forward to the 2030 by replacing the capacity of the automobile industry. 30% will be replaced by the EV. But how we do that? The incentive from the government for the maker, automaker, as well as the consumer. So this is the consumer or the people can participate in the process of the making the CO2 less and less in the future. So these are example. And just want to mention about the PM 2.5. PM 2.5 can come many ways. Forest fire, as I mentioned already. Forest fire is the cross-border issue. Very luckily, in Bangkok, now we have less problem than in the northern part of Thailand, because we share the border with our neighboring country. So we have to change the behavior of our farmer, burning outside the paddy field. That's the culture of the farmers. It's very difficult to convince. But anyway, we have to do more and more on how to convince them to do how's the burning of the paddy field in the future. So I will stop here first.
Thank you very much, Minister Akom. Indeed, we are in the Anthropocene, the age of man. Many of the things we are seeing today are actually caused by irreversible actions of mankind. Minister, you made some very interesting points, and the first is actually that we are in a situation where we need a whole of economy approach. The approach also has to be global, and this really gives a lot of credence to the point that DPM Wong raised. Because it's a global issue, we need interoperability of frameworks to ensure that we tackle this from a global perspective. Minister Sri Mulyani, climate actions, green paradigm shifts, they all cost money. And certainly you made this point today and yesterday that energy is the most complex and the most expensive. And therefore the affordability issues that you raised are actually of paramount importance. So when you talk about affordability, you shared a bit with us just now about some of the dimensions of affordability. What other dimensions of affordability do we have to think of, for example, social costs? And I also noted that countries who are most vulnerable to climate change also have high costs of capital. So this naturally makes it so much more expensive for the people who need to transition to actually transition. And also, it's starting to make a lot of people worry about green debt traps. I wonder if you can share with us your views on these issues, Minister.
This is very important question about the affordability. And we should not just talking at the normative level. When you talk about affordability, you can measure it. In this case, as DPM mentioned about the data and how you are going to measure it. This is one of how we are going to be able to measure from the financing side. Let's say I'm using the 660 megawatt that we are going to retire the coal. then if this is the asset belong to the electricity company, the national electricity company, you are going to shut down, that means their asset is going to be gone, no matter how much value left after depreciation. So how you are going to compensate that? Because this electricity company, they also operate, they issue debt, and these are all based on all the financial indicators. So when we talk about affordability, does it mean that when you shut down a certain asset, the balance sheet of this corporation is still going to be sustainable? And if it is yes, then who's going to bear the burden? So that's one thing. This asset is going to be located in a certain region with the population surrounding it, which may be affected by the close down of this operation. You mentioned about the social cost in this case. So we really need to estimate what is the social and economic cost of shutting down, or is there any scenario of using this asset for other activity that will definitely require investment. The question, who should invest on that? Government, in this case, that means my budget is going to be required to invest for that. The third one, if 660 megawatt is going to be retired, while the demand continue increase, then you are going to have replacement for the 660 megawatt in terms of the renewable. So which renewable and where is the location? Let's say we are going to go to the geothermal, which is not easy because the exploration race and all those things. Location not necessarily always in the Java. In this case, we are talking about the Java island, in which the location of all, most of this coal base. So if we are going to build a new renewable, this is most attractive. Many financial institutions love to invest in this renewable. Of course, the cost in terms of the interest, rate of return, and so on needs still to be discussed. But this is definitely maybe less difficult in attracting money. But this one, which is related coal, even though we put it within the proposal, I've already heard when we discussed yesterday with the US ASEAN Business Council, European Business Council, they said that if I'm financing this coal retirement, they still be considered as a data, in their taxonomy, they are financing coal, although this is reduction coal. So it's become a problem in terms of their compliance on this ESG. So the regulatory framework globally is not yet also aligned well with this need. And that's why we still need to discuss with many of the regulatory body. We also need to provide a signaling, while at the same time, DPM mentioned about there is also now, if this is going to be in a taxonomy, you start computing, calculating, and then the compliance data, people can see that there is a possibility of greenwashing. So on the one hand, there is a lot of need to accommodate this principle. On the other hand, there will be a lot of entrepreneurs, which may be with a bad intention or with their entrepreneurial thinking, to greenwash within this kind of principle. There is always a moral hazard also in this case. So what I'm saying, this is really a good problem, because we at least identify the problem. The bad problem is that we don't know what is the problem, but it's affecting us. At least we know this is the problem, and then now we can and we should start discussing it within the context. And that's why Indonesia play a very active role. In Indonesia, I talk to many of the business sector here in Indonesia, because we cannot launch this decarbonization, or in this case, shutting down the coal, without talking about with our business community. I have to talk with the coal miner, I have to talk with the power sector producer, I have to talk with the PLN, that is our monopolies electricity company. These are all need to be discussed internally. Globally, we also play an active role, and that's why during the G20, when President Jokowi announcing it and even targeting a certain project, we also get a lot of support globally from the international partner group. We have Just Energy Transition Partnership I mentioned earlier with 20 billion. We also have Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet. We also have the Glasgow Finance Alliance for Net Zero, which I discussed with all of them. In order for us, okay, you cannot just come from seminar to seminar. We now have to make a progress. Now, this is the area that we will work on a taxonomy. Indonesia, that is the OJK, the Financial Sector Authority, also announcing and launching this taxonomy. Within the ASEAN, we have this version 2, which is accommodating the energy sector, especially on this retirement of the coal, which is good. They put it within the green and amber, meaning that they are supposed to be eligible for financing. This will help, at least. And this is the ASEAN taxonomy, the version 2, I believe is the first in the world, which is addressing the issue of this energy. So it's good for the ASEAN to push forward with a concrete action. Then it can then communicate it with other like the European, Japan, or even in this case, United States, how you are going to like then interoperable of all these principles within the context of the financing is no border. So you can come from more advanced country with trillion money or 100 trillion money on the financing side, but they are not channeling to the real need of the project. Last thing I would like to also emphasize the carbon market, of course. As Minister Arkom mentioned about the carbon emitted in the air, and there is no border whether this is in Singapore or in Indonesia or in Thailand, but we are going to either emit or reduce the CO2. The market has no boundary, but we try to create a boundary by having a carbon market in each country. The price will be different, although the same commodity. That will also create a complication. For example, if DPM in Singapore will put a price high enough and our price is low enough, there is a lot of, in this case, incentive to sell it to Singapore. The question, this is going to be sold in Singapore, claimed as a Singapore CO2 reduction or Indonesia CO2. These are all also the discussion, at least within the context of what we are all, even when implementing the market of carbon, there are so many complexity that we really need, talking about jurisdiction, talking about claim, or in this case, the CO2 emission or reduction that need to be accountable and transparent, and also in terms of whether the money really flowing that can then finance not only on energy, but in Indonesia we have mangrove, we have a lot of the forest which is taking care, and that creating quite a lot of carbon credit. So very exciting problem actually. For me as a technocrat, it's challenging us a lot in terms of the technical policy regulation and discussing with so many stakeholders. We also working in this case because technical assistance is very important. There is a lot of financial instrument, whether in the form of grant, guarantee, loans, equity financing, which need all to be explored unlimited. So it's a very good problem in the sense that we are technically challenged by so many issues, but with a lot of goodwill and discussion that take place, I do hope each year we are going to make a progress, because as GPM WOM mentioned that we don't have enough time to actually avoid this catastrophic consequence of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. Minister Arkom, Minister Sri Mulyani has often talked about just and affordable transition, and we've covered the affordable part. Yesterday at another session, I was saying that we're actually fighting a war of two battles now. The first is actually on climate change. The second is on sustainable development. And if we lose either of the battles, we lose the entire war. Minister Arkom, you have often said that it is important to recognize different starting points, but many of the frameworks that we see out there today don't seem to take that into consideration. They seem more concerned about having a single baseline for everyone to adopt. How do you think we can address this critical issue?
Yes, I think we could not afford to lose both battles. we have to win. Because as I said, the climate change and sustainable finance or sustainable development are related issues. Climate change is more or less on the natural disaster. So there's some way that the government attempts has to be how to protect the damage on the paddy field, for example. Okay, but on sustainable development, I think this is we have to put more effort on this, because as I said, in transport sector, in the energy sector, or even in the manufacturing sector, so all the polluted. So how to reduce, how to make less carbon CO2 into the air. So this is what I think on the both sides the government should be able to help. But how? I think one of the policy is the biodiversity, circular green economy. When we talk about, I talk about the bioenergy, but bioenergy in the future will be, we will be in excessive of the ethanol, for example, or the biodiesel. How we gonna handle with the excessive supply of the ethanol? One thing is we can do is turning from the petrochemical to the bioenergy, biomaterial, bioethylene. So now we are looking to support one of the big industry in Thailand is turning from the ethanol to the biomaterials. So that can add the value added for the petrochemical industry. So this is one of the transition from the petrochemical using oil and gas to the other. Secondly, the no waste in the production process and in consumption. So this is circular. Looking, for example, in Thailand, during the price of the fertilizer, chemical fertilizer has been increasing over the last year. What we did is to convince the farmers to use the rice straw for the animal feed, as well as the organic fertilizer. That can bring down the cost of the production in the agricultural products. So no waste at all in the production process and the consumption process. Thirdly, on the environment, yes, of course, I think this is very important for the private sector to participate as should be the compulsory for all the companies to follow the ESG guideline. So that's the things that we are pursuing in Thailand. Okay. Then, when we talk about the climate financing, what to finance? Taxonomy is one of the guidelines, I think, for the commercial or even the state-owned banks. In Thailand, we have to be quick enough to identify what is the really mean for climate and sustainable finance. The bank is waiting. The bank has already, I think most of the banks has already allocated one of the portfolio for the climate financing. So we have to give them the answer. But it's not limited to I think it's not limited to the taxonomy, because as the Minister Simulyani mentioned, there will be some gray area between the precise definition and unclear that the bank can justify. So I think it's leaving some flexibility for individual country to handle the problems, because the problems in country may be different from the other. So I agree that the taxonomy is important. It's not only discussing in the ASEAN. I think we are the first to issue the taxonomy on the climate change. So I think the other things that I just want to support the Minister Sri Mulyani on the carbon market. I think we should be the seller, but first we have to help ourselves. If we are able to produce cheaper carbon decarbonization, then maybe, you know, we can be selling outside the country. But first priority is that to help the region, because we are powerhouse of the world. So we have to make our industry cleaner and cleaner. That's the things. Otherwise, that you know, our export market of goods that will be imposed by the Europe or United States on the climate issues. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Akom. It's interesting to see how Thailand is augmenting policy to help it accelerate from its starting point and also to gain recognition globally. So that's a very interesting point. DPM Wong, ultimately without funding, we can't change anything, whether it be in the climate space or it be the sustainable development space. How do you think we can crowd in more capital and also from the private sector, of course, and also improve interoperability, which you mentioned just now, to help global capital flows? And I just wanted to add a question on, which is, how do you see the ASEAN taxonomy being a regional taxonomy able to help move the funding needle for us in the region? Because we do know there are some projects that are currently unbankable because their climate credentials can't be confirmed. Can I get your views on this, please?
Sure. I mentioned just now the building blocks to unlock green financing around data disclosure and definitions or taxonomies. These building blocks ideally should converge towards some global standards in time to come. And there is work underway now to discuss across all three areas, data disclosures and taxonomies, how we can at least work towards some common standards. Even if we can't find convergence or harmonize around the world, at least try to have some common language, common classifications, and work towards interoperability. And that will help unlock financing. It's important because, as we heard just now, Minister Sri Mulyani was saying, if a global bank that wants to finance a project in Southeast Asia, they will want to know whether it is eligible for green financing. And say, for example, in the past, the bank may say from headquarters, you cannot finance any fossil fuel project at all. Then even a gas project cannot be financed. But that's not quite, for ASEAN, that's not very relevant, because actually, if a country is going from coal to gas as a transition fuel, it's actually a good thing. So it should be financed. Fortunately, Europe has changed its position on gas. So that's good. But now we are talking about another thing, which is early retirement of coal plants, which Europe has not embraced yet. But ASEAN, I think, is the first in our updated taxonomy to talk about a classification for early retirement of coal plants that can be eligible for green financing, so long as it's consistent with the science-based pathways to get to 1.5 degrees. And that's a very major step forward, because then an international bank can look at this. It will build confidence amongst investors and financiers, and they say, maybe this can be financed. The European standards have not embraced this yet, so Minister Sri Mulyani is right that the European and American banks, they go back to HQ, they will say, well, if you were to finance an early retirement of coal plant, it increases my coal financing, it's not permitted. But I think, speaking to many of the bank executives, I think they are taking a pragmatic approach, and because ASEAN now has this taxonomy in place, it gives them some confidence for the regional office to say, look, actually, if I were to finance an early retirement of coal plant, it's a good thing for ASEAN, and it can be financed. It ought to be justified. And then they can make the case up to their headquarters and hopefully get financing. So it's actually a very important development, this version 2 of our ASEAN taxonomy, and we hope it will unlock more transition financing for Southeast Asia. But as has been said by the fellow panelists, taxonomy alone will not help bankability. I mean, data definitions and disclosures are building blocks, but they will not solve the fundamental issue of bankability, which is more complex. And Minister Sri Mulyani talked about this too. Whether a project is bankable or not depends on many other factors. If a coal plant is already locked into a long-term power purchase agreement, and it's a fairly new coal plant, and you want to retire, it's very difficult because it's very expensive to retire that coal plant. Or for that matter, if there is a renewable energy project that you want to finance, it's very straightforward, it's a green project. But if the price of the renewable power is more expensive than the price of power in that country itself, then there's a huge gap. And in order to finance, it's not so simple. So in order to unlock more green financing, we need other solutions beyond taxonomy. And one way is to do it through blended finance, where we crowd in more concessionary capital so that the concessionary capital can catalyze commercial or private capital, and we can provide blended financing solutions to these projects. So we are trying our best in Singapore to scale up such blended finance solutions, working together with multilateral development banks. The ADB is working with Indonesia on something, which is the energy transition mechanism. We want to do more with other MDBs and also with our private institutions within Singapore itself. And hopefully with the ongoing conversations about the reform of the World Bank, we can see the World Bank also playing a more leading role in this area of transition financing and blended financing. So I think those are some more promising areas that we hope can facilitate and accelerate transition financing for our part of the world. Then a final point around the conversation around developing carbon markets and how this might eventually be something we do regionally. Clearly, each country will have to also think about their price of electricity today. And this can be sensitive because it is a sensitive matter. It's something that impacts on the citizens every day. Ideally, the price of electricity that's produced should, if it's produced by fossil fuels, should not be subsidized, and the subsidies can be phased out. Then, of course, there is an issue of affordability. In Singapore, our approach is we price the electricity at the full cost, but we ensure affordability for the lower income groups by giving them subsidies separately. So the subsidies are not part of the fuel price or not part of the electricity price, but is given separately to the household. And that's how we can make sure that the electricity price itself is priced properly. On top of that, we apply a carbon tax. And then it makes sense because the renewable projects, many of these carbon mitigation projects can become bankable, can become viable. This is Singapore's approach. Every country will have to look for their own solutions. But we are very clear that as each country explores their own solutions, the credits that they generate, the renewable power that they generate must meet their needs first within their own country. Because the country must be able to, first of all, get to net zero first within their own respective country before they can even think about exporting. So the principle is very clear. The national goals must come first. The country must have confidence that they are able to get to net zero themselves. Then they can think about exporting green power, green electrons, carbon credits, and that sort of thing. And as Southeast Asia, as we think about exporting, I hope we all give priority to ASEAN. So country first, ASEAN second. Then beyond ASEAN, we can talk about later.
Thank you, DPM Wong. So what you said is absolutely important. ASEAN in one voice is much, much stronger and has more credibility. The second takeaway I had from you is that while the taxonomy provides a common language, what we need to do now is to use this common language to develop more solutions, and we need more of those innovative solutions. We do have some time for some Q&A, so I'd like to ask the floor. If you have any questions for our esteemed panel, if you do, please raise your hand, identify yourself and where you come from. Oh, there's a question over there.
Thank you, moderator. My name is Sutopo from the Indonesia Infrastructure Guarantee Fund. A question for DPM, Mr. Wong. Singapore currently plays a unique role in ASEAN in terms of energy because Singapore acts as a hub for energy, but Singapore also imports energy for other Asian countries. And one case is the import of natural gas, Singapore from Indonesia. But in doing so, with this Sumatra to Singapore pipeline, Singapore also helped Indonesia to afford to utilize the natural gas locally in Sumatra and surrounding areas. So how do you see this evolve into this transition energy and to the green economy? Will Singapore also play similar role in fulfilling its own needs for transition, but also helping the other Asian countries doing so in the process? Thank you.
Thank you. Singapore will always be an energy importer. I mean, to the extent that we are a hub for energy, it's because we are a trading hub for oil. But as far as our own energy power needs are concerned, we are very clear. We will always have to import raw materials. We've got nothing of our own. We won't have enough solar power, for example, even though we are trying to quadruple our solar energy capabilities, it will never be enough. So we will continue to import, whether it's natural gas in future, maybe it's green hydrogen, maybe even electrons itself, the actual electricity. We will welcome all of that. And to the extent that we do so, I think it's win-win because the countries that we import from can also benefit from our importing because it can help catalyze and more financing. It can help catalyze more projects. Just as it has, as you mentioned rightly, when we import natural gas, it catalyzes more discovery. It provides a pipeline, and the natural gas resource is also used in Indonesia. So it's win-win for both sides. And that's why we are very happy. Not too long ago, when President Jokowi was in Singapore for the Leaders' Retreat, we signed an MOU for cooperation on renewable energy cooperation between our two countries. And so we hope that this will help to facilitate more cooperation projects, bilateral projects on renewable energy, as we have been doing for natural gas as well.
Thank you very much, DPM Wong. Are there any further questions from the floor? Well, since there are no further questions from the floor, I want to ask a very quick question to our ministers. MSMEs are a very big component of Southeast Asia. There are 70 million of them, and we need to help them transition. So what's your view on the action that we should take to help the MSMEs? Minister Akom, would you like to start first?
You're talking about the MSME or SME?
MSMEs, yeah.
Yeah, we should talk about both the SME and MSME. I think yes, there are contribute to the national economy is quite a lot, and also they employ so many workers. So the first things that in Thailand that we been doing is helping them on financing, particularly liquidity and liquidity. Secondly, to help them to transform their business to the higher technology or business that using more high tech, particularly digital economy, to help them reduce the cost of doing business. And lastly, I think the role of the MSME in the energy transition, I think, yes, of course, because it's becoming the policies. It's not only limited to the big company, but also the smaller company, or even the household, as I mentioned, okay? So the household also participate, MSME also participate. Government offices also participate in the solar energy. So I think basically the MSME and the SME, I think the financial issue for them. I just want to add one more point on the renewable energy. In Thailand, in the past we are talking about the renewable energy from the household and from many wind power. The issue was the stability of the power supply to the national grid. I think now the technology has been very advancing, so it's becoming more stable than before. So one of the projects that we are working on is we have already had the one floating solar farm with the Electricity Generation Authority of Thailand. So you make use of the reservoir on the surface to put the solar panel. And we are going forward to the second and third projects on the floating solar. I think many countries will do the same because the land is very expensive. So make use of any resource that you have.
Thank you. Our time's up, but because MSMEs are such an important area, I just wanted to get Minister Mulyani, Sri Mulyani and DPM Wong to quickly respond.
Well, MSME is very important in general for the energy transition. Maybe they're more on the demand side, how they can afford to have the energy which is cheap enough. And that's why, as DPM mentioned, that providing a targeted subsidy rather than distorted the price is very important. The principle is understandable, but implication in terms of how you transition from the energy subsidy which is based on a commodity into targeted, this is politically usually very delicate. But as MSME is very, very important also for Indonesia, because when you talk about the climate change agenda, we have two very important, like forestry and land use. And these are all the area which is for Indonesia is a lot of MSME. For example, like replanting mangrove and making sure that people who actually work close to the preserved forest, they are going to be able to have the economic activity which is not going to destroy the natural resources, but they also preserving it. And this will be provided support from the government, for example, by targeted subsidy credit for their activity, or even grant at even village level. So these are all very important. Indonesia has a fiscal tool, for example, supporting up to the village level, the village fund, that now entering year 6, they are now, many of the villages now have their own, what you call it, economic entity, which is employing many of the local village people, so that they are going to have an additional earning income, which is, I think that's also good for their prosperity. So a lot of things, I mean, in general, the MSME in this case, whether you are talking about the support on the financial, that is the subsidized credit, or you are talking about digital transformation by providing platforms so that they have the access to the market, wider access to the market. We are also providing technical assistance. And also in this case, when you link to the environment or the energy, then they are going to look at the more related to the climate change agenda like land use and forestry.
Thank you very much, Minister Sri Mulyani. And DPM Wong.
Thank you. We do three things in Singapore. Number one, like what Minister Sri Mulyani talked about, we provide targeted help to SMEs to reduce their energy consumption, to become more energy efficient. So the schemes we provide are specific. For example, in F&B, in food and beverage, a company, a restaurant can have more efficient chillers, more efficient kitchen equipment, so we provide subsidy. You can change your equipment, you buy the new equipment, it's subsidized. And then they can start retrofitting, buying new equipment, all of which uses less energy. It's win-win for both sides. The restaurant or the company can start using less energy, can start to become green. And I think from the government point of view, it also helps in our overall strategy to reduce our own emissions. So that's one strategy. Second, we are also helping SMEs to start to take stock of their own emissions. Because big companies all have very good plans to reduce emissions, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, get to net zero. The large companies know how to do it, but the smaller companies don't even know how to begin. How do you start to track and monitor your emissions? So we are providing capability building schemes to help companies and workers think about how they can track their emissions. Because there may well come a time in the future where banks will say, if you want financing, let me look at your green score. Today, they look at your credit score, credit rating. But in future, they may say, look, I want to see your company's green score. Are you a green company? If you are, then I give you financing. And so we are telling all our companies, start to get ready. You need to know where your emissions are. And you need to have a plan to start reducing your emissions over time. And we are providing some assistance to all our companies, especially our SMEs, to do this work. The third area is to help new SMEs capitalize on the opportunities in the green economy. Because even as we transit to a new green economy, there will be new sectors, new industries that are being built. For example, in Singapore now, you've got companies doing electric vehicles. Never used to have, right? We stopped doing automobile manufacturing for a long time, but now you've got electric vehicle companies here in Singapore. We've got some companies doing renewable energy. And as these new green clusters develop, usually developed by the larger multinational companies first, they will build an ecosystem, and it will provide opportunities for the smaller local companies to provide components to be part of that ecosystem. And there are more and more SMEs that are also entering this space, including in areas like green fintech, for example, in electric transport, in many other areas. So that's a third area where we can help provide opportunities for our SMEs.
Well, with that, thank you very much to our thought leaders for sharing their insights with us. And if I can invite all of you to give them a round of applause. Thank you very much, Excellencies.
Thank you very much to our moderator and speakers for the fruitful discussion.
Now we would like to invite all ministers, our speakers, and also moderator to have the group photo for a moment. So we'd like to invite our photographer and videographer to take a picture of our speakers and also moderator. Once again, we would like to thank all speakers and also moderator for today's agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, please once again give a round of applause for our moderator and speakers. Thank you for coming to Minister of Finance of the Republic of Indonesia, Ibu Sri Mulyani Indrawati, His Excellency Mr. Lawrence Wong, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Finance of Singapore,
His Excellency Mr. Arkom Tempitayapaisit, Minister of Finance of Thailand.
I would like also to thank Mr. Eugene Wong for a very interesting discussion. So ladies and gentlemen, in a very short moment, we're going to proceed to the next agenda. So ladies and gentlemen, we will conclude this seminar with the closing remarks that will be delivered by Mr. Jiro Tominaga, Country Director of Indonesia, Resident Mission of ATB. So please welcome Mr. Jiro Tominaga.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. Her Excellency Ibu Sri Mulyani Indrawati, Minister of Finance, Indonesia, His Excellency Lawrence Wong, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Singapore, His Excellency Minister Arkom, Minister of Finance in Thailand. It is really my great honor and privilege to be able to share a few messages in closing this extremely important and insightful seminar on financing transition in ASEAN. I think it's already been said repeatedly, but I still want to say this to reiterate the point that climate change is actually the biggest issue of our times, and it is especially visible in our region, Southeast Asia. While achieving net zero emission is key to avert the most impacts of climate change, there is realization that can only be achieved through a just and affordable transition. Many ASEAN countries have made commitments to achieve net zero by 2050 or 2060. In addition, ASEAN countries also have made ambitious commitments to energy transition. All these commitments will need significant financing, and the transition also must be just. But the region faces a significant financing investment gap for financing the energy transition. Southeast Asia's immense $210 billion per year need in climate-resilient infrastructure means that all and any infrastructure investment must mitigate or adapt to climate change impacts. The scale of investment required is beyond the means of the public sector alone. We need to therefore mobilize funds urgently and at scale, for which we need global pools of private capital sources such as commercial banks, insurance, and pension funds to fill the massive gaps in climate infrastructure financing. And the window of opportunity for influencing irreversible climate change is closing. The latest report from the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change highlights that actions taken in the next 7 years will really determine whether or not we limit the global temperature rise to under 1.5 degrees. For our part, ADB has stepped up as the climate bank for Asia and the Pacific. Our ambition is to provide $100 billion in cumulative climate financing from 2019 to 2030, while launching game-changing platforms to scale up climate financing. I think this seminar has extensively discussed the increasing need to scale up all sources of finance to deliver the net zero transition in Southeast Asia. 3 key areas in my mind seems to clearly stand out from the discussions. First, of course, is on policies and standards. While the number of green and sustainable financing instruments will continue to increase to match the growing sustainability appetite of investors, policies and standards are critical to provide international credibility. This is precisely what the ASEAN Taxonomy and ASEAN Transition Guidelines seek to do. The ASEAN Taxonomy is a guide that help identify and classify sustainable projects and economic activities. Without a common taxonomy, there will be fragmentation in regional approach and lack of clarity for businesses and investors. The ASEAN taxonomy therefore underpins the ASEAN voice to provide consistency and credibility, which will be important to secure international acceptance. So on this note, we very much would like to congratulate the ASEAN Taxonomy Board, which launched version 2 of its taxonomy, which includes criteria for coal phase-outs. So building on this, it will also be very important for ASEAN to develop transition guidelines. The guidelines will provide clarity to those seeking to raise capital on the disclosure required to attract private financing for transition activities. It will also provide justification and credibility that will enable international investors to finance ASEAN transition. I understand that the guideline is the priority of the ASEAN Capital Market Forum that will be delivered during Indonesia's ASEAN chairmanship. So second is to build a transition pipeline. Lack of bankable projects that support the transition is a pervading critical challenge for countries in Southeast Asia. Governments need to invest in upstream planning and project preparation to develop such pipelines. While capital is available, the bottleneck is often a robust, bankable pipelines that can be brought to market within a reasonable amount of time. So on this note, regional platforms to help develop pipeline is important. For example, the ASEAN Catalytic Green Finance Facility is a $1.9 billion ASEAN-owned green finance vehicle that provides technical support for project structuring and financing support to de-risk projects in order to build a pipeline of green projects for the region. Such platforms can help with the due diligence work and provide capacity building for policymakers and regulators. And third and final is on innovative financing platforms. ADB is supporting the energy transition mechanism, which will expedite the retirement of coal-fired power plants, support the implementation of retirement of coal-fired power plants, support the installation of renewable energy sources, and help ensure a just energy transition that protects the poor and vulnerables. Indonesia's progress on energy transition provides an example for other countries to forge a path to net zero. So ADB is committed to supporting these efforts across the region, while once scaled up, the new ETM partnership has the potential to serve as one of the largest carbon reduction models in the world. So in closing, I would like to thank the Ministry of Finance Indonesia for hosting this seminar. The discussion we had over the last 2 days, I think including the strategic perspective we just heard from the Ministers of Finance, underline ASEAN countries' commitment to transition. I also hope this seminar will inspire and catalyze new ideas and approaches to transition finance. So with that, thank you very much and terima kasih banyak. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jiro Tominaga, for the closing remark. Please kindly return to your seat. Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's our pleasure to invite Ms. Nela Sri Hendrieti, the Director of Center for Regional and Bilateral Policy, to deliver her closing remarks. Please welcome Ms. Nela Sri Hendrieti.
Good afternoon, and distinguished guests, colleagues, and ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the opportunity to provide some remarks to conclude this important seminar on financing transition in ASEAN. As the ASEAN Finance Deputy, I'm here because Pak Febrio need to escort Bu Menteri and then will be a moderator in press briefing. So I deliver his remarks here. So as his role as a finance deputy, he's been listening closely to the discussion, and which has highlighted the importance of ASEAN work to finance the transition. As highlighted by Minister Sri Mulyani in her opening remarks, this year's ASEAN chairmanship theme is ASEAN Matters, the epicenter of growth. The theme was carefully chosen to underscore the continued relevance of ASEAN as a center of growth, even amidst the numerous global challenges we currently face. As we all know, over the course of its history, ASEAN has enjoyed impressive economic growth, making it a critical player in regional economic and financial cooperation and integration. As such, our effort to bolster and improve these areas remain a top priority. The ASEAN region has shown remarkable stability and resilience, making significant strides in financial integration. These accomplishments have undoubtedly piqued the interest of investors looking for viable investment opportunities to maintain ASEAN appeal to investors. We must remain nimble and adaptable, updating our agenda and priorities on a regular basis. With increasing demand from private investors for sustainable and green investment, we must prioritize green and transition investment to meet these changing needs. We can continue to attract investors and promote long-term economic growth in the region by doing so. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, over the past few years, we have seen the growing agenda of sustainable finance in ASEAN member states. Beyond national-owned agenda, ASEAN member states take commitment to address climate change seriously and believe that working together toward a sustainable future is crucial for the development of the region. The ASEAN taxonomy for sustainable finance is a remarkable achievement that demonstrates how ASEAN members have collaborated to advance sustainable activities and investments in order to drive the region's sustainability agenda. The ASEAN taxonomy has become a critical milestone in promoting sustainable finance and facilitating the flow of capital toward sustainable projects in the region. The release of version 2 of the ASEAN taxonomy marks a significant milestone for both ASEAN and the world. It is the first ever taxonomy that has accommodated energy transition on its green and amber categories of activities that are eligible for financing. This important step further cements ASEAN's commitment to leading the global discussion in defining transition activities and advancing sustainable finance. By including energy in the ASEAN taxonomy, we are promoting the financing of activities that contribute to the low carbon transition and help to mitigate the impacts of climate change. This will help to catalyze the transition to a sustainable and resilient future, not just for ASEAN, but for the world. However, we recognize that there is still more work to be done in this area. We have heard from various stakeholders, including the private sector and policymakers, that there is a need for further effort to ensure that ASEAN countries can attract the necessary financing to support the transition to a more sustainable future. We understand the importance of creating a conducive environment that encourages sustainable investment and incentivizes private sector involvement in sustainable projects. Moving forward, we will continue to work closely with our member states and relevant stakeholders to further develop and refine the ASEAN taxonomy for sustainable finance and to explore other innovative financing mechanisms that can support sustainable development in the region. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank all speakers for their valuable views and suggestions for further advance in the ASEAN Sustainable Finance Agenda. In conclusion, I would like to express my gratitude to all of you for dedicating your time and attention to our discussion today. As we work towards achieving the ASEAN energy transition and delivering tangible results this year, I remain hopeful that I can count on your unwavering support here in Indonesia. Your commitment and contribution will be essential in driving progress and achieving success in these critical areas. Once again, thank you for your continued dedication and collaboration toward a brighter future for ASEAN. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ibu Nela Sri Hendrieti. Terima kasih, Ibu, for your closing remark.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we have had a productive and inspiring time together. Ladies and gentlemen, we kindly inform that we will have media briefing after this agenda. We also provide you the QR code which will be displayed on the screen. So please just scan the QR code to get this whole content of ministerial fireside chat. And you may also access the feedback by scan the QR code and please kindly fill in and complete the whole question because you may rename the certificate of this seminar by complete the feedback form.
And on behalf of the host and the committee, we would like to extend our appreciations to you all for coming and for actively participating on a ministerial fireside chat financing transition in ASEAN. I'm Faizer, and here my partner Regine. We are signing off.
Good afternoon and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Santi 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 Om.